Hello and welcome to another episode of Keeping London Healthy. I'm Dr. Mario Elia and welcome to an in-person live episode. We've done basically 2 years of me being in front of a screen talking to specialists. It's kind of cool to be out in the real world. And we're at the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame today. I'm excited to show you guys around. We'll be joined by Lissa Foster, Executive Director here at the hall. She'll be showing us some of her favorite laureates. And I'll be taking a tour showing you some of the laureates, some of the stories, and kind of how it relates to medicine today in 2022. So we'll take a quick break and we'll come back with Lissa. All right, welcome back. Again, we're happy to join you live today on scene for the first time in the history of this show, which is exciting. And we're at the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame right here in London. And I'm pleased to be joined today by Lissa Foster. She is the Executive Director here of the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, it's our pleasure.
So I know a lot of Londoners probably, if you ask them, aren't even aware that we have the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame here in London. Can you tell us a little bit, like, what is this place?
So great question, and you're absolutely right. Lots of Canadians don't know that Canada has a Medical Hall of Fame. So like all halls of fame, Dr. Elia, we exist to shine a light on excellence in a field. And I mean, literally, 1993, Dr. Calvin Stiller from London is visiting that brand new building called the Hockey Hall of Fame for the first time with his son. And his son says, "How come there's a Hall of Fame for hockey players, Dad, but not for people who do what you do?" And it was a good question. And he came back and talked to some people about it here. And interestingly, it was both Dr. Henry Friesen, who was the head of the MRC, Medical Research Council of Canada at the time, and local business leaders here in London who really took hold of the idea. So our first board chair, came from business, from Canada Trust, was started in that regard. And so it was born here in London. Obviously, it has a national purview. You don't have to be a Londoner to be in the Hall of Fame. But the whole notion of shining a light on excellence in this field and using that as a source of inspiration and a source of energy to fuel Canadian pride, but also to encourage youth to look at the health sciences as a career option. It was born then, and we began and now have 149 laureates that have been inducted.
Great. I know now we've moved, obviously, here to Kellogg Lane for the new facility. Used to be downtown. Can you tell us a little bit, why the relocation and what's kind of led to that?
Absolutely. So a commonly asked question. We, as a national organization, I would say that our virtual hall presence exists online. Any Canadian can learn about these incredible stories by going to our website. But we're very proud of the London roots, and it's not exactly the kind of thing someone sits around and says, "I wonder if I should go visit the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame today." What we knew is this: people that did find their way there, through all the guest comments that they made, loved it. They did feel inspired. They were astounded, actually, by some of the amazing contributions that Canadians have made. And so it made sense for us, as our lease was expiring with the City of London, to say, why don't we take these things to a place where there's already going to be people? Our focus was not bringing people in. Our focus is our national programs and youth career exploration in the health sciences. But as long as we have all of this, why not share it in a place where there will be people? And it was right about that time that you were seeing in the paper that Martha Leach and Paul McLaughlin had purchased 100 Kellogg, and that something exciting was happening here. So that's how it began. Some simple conversations. This place is, they say where entertainment and culture meet. There's lots going on here, and we're in a great spot with just pass-through space that if you happen to be going through the building at any time for any reason, one of the things you can do is stop and read about some of these stories.
And that's one of the cool things we had chatted about is, the old location. Honestly, I'd never been, I've been a lifelong Londoner. Yeah. I'd never been there myself, because when is it open? When can you go and the facility here? And we're going to show the viewers around, but you can come anytime and you can walk through, and it's open air, and it's fantastic. No admission. Completely free to come. And so many cool stories, which we're going to share today.
Yeah, they are. And you can read the plaques, you can see some of the displays, or you can even go into our Laureate Theatre. Our website is right there on a screen, and you can start scrolling through. Perhaps you've read about May Cohen and you're like, wow, that's really interesting. Who is she? you can actually go into the Laureate Theatre then and watch the tribute video about her, read her Laureate page, learn more.
Absolutely. So what we're going to do now is we're going to take a quick pause, and we're going to basically take you on a bit of a tour, show us some of your favorites, laureates, and some of your favorite stories, and I'll share some of the with the viewers some of my favorites, because even myself just walking around, we've found some really cool stories for you guys. So we're going to start the tour now. All right, so we're going to share with you some of the cool stories of some of the laureates. So again, 149 laureates who've been inducted into the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. So many huge contributions that really have affected health worldwide. And this one caught my eye. I saw a pill bottle here, and I thought, what's this story about Henry Bro?
Yeah, great story. Windsor, Ontario. Working in pediatrics, and one too many child poisonings in Hotel Dieu Hospital down in Windsor, and just literally thought, this has got to be preventable. How are kids breaking into their adults, to their parents' medication? So this palm and turn container became something that he commissioned to get done. He's not an inventor himself, but he just worked with a group, got some funding, and said, honestly, there's got to be a better way to store medication that kids can't get into, but that adults or even elderly people can. So along comes the palm and turn container. Such a simple little thing. Childhood poisonings dropped dramatically in the Windsor area. Of course, it gets adopted nationally and I think even internationally. And you saw a direct relationship between the introduction of the palm and turn and the reduction of child poisoning.
So cool. And how many of us use those kind of bottles every single day?
Every day.
And a Canadian out of Windsor developing it. Very cool.
Yeah.
All right. So certainly, noticing a lot of the laureates, it's certainly kind of male dominated in terms of the laureates, and that's really a reflection of kind of what the last 100 or so years have been of medical science, with women kind of being excluded from a lot of areas. But we want to focus on a lot of the women who did kind of persevere through that and made huge strides. And here, I think Dr. Maud Abbott is one of those
Absolutely.
physicians.
People like Maud Abbott, May Cohen, Emily Stowe, they paved the way for women today. More than half of the enrollees in medical school now are women, and that was only possible because of their work. So not a medical doctor, a research scientist, but Dr. Abbott came to become a leading pathologist and actually helped to inform heart surgery all across North America with her writings by way of the Pathology Museum at McGill University. Took an interest in things she saw there, wrote about it, studied it, got the interest of others, even has a chapter in the classic 1907 Systems of Modern Medicine. It seems easy to say, here's what she did, but we have to remember that she did it at a time when few would have listened to a woman and what she had to say. So it just makes that achievement and contribution even more extraordinary.
Absolutely.
So here we're at a display about Dr. Brenda Milner. Dr. Milner is actually still alive. She's 102 years old, and until about 5 years ago was still walking up the hill from the MNI to McGill in Montreal. So with her age, that she was practicing at a time that women were not always taken seriously in any scientific profession, but she persisted. She was a psychologist, actually, and earned her PhD and worked with Donald Hebb and built on the work of Wilder Penfield and helped to develop that understanding of the relationship of memory and how memory is stored neurologically, where it's stored, what can and can't be done, how short-term memory can be gone while long-term memory remains. And dozens of people have, probably scores of people have built on the work of Brenda Milner since. You can even do the star, well, maybe you can't, you should try.
What is it?
So there's the mirror and you have to trace the star. And
by looking this way?
Yep, by looking at the mirror, which is very odd. But what she proposes is that the more times you do it, your memory is so ingrained in going in a certain direction that the reflection is making you do it in a different way. But you actually can remember that skill eventually if you do it enough times. And I think what's important about this is remembering how to do something is very different than remembering, say, a face or a street you live on. And understanding that all of this happens in different parts of our brain was, something that had to be learned and something that Canadians were instrumental in helping the world understand.
All right, thanks Lisa for sharing
pleasure.
those great stories. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, I'm going to share with you some of my favorite stories that are really kind of medically relevant and affect many of you from day to day in your health lives. So we're going to take a quick break, and we'll be right back after this message. All right, welcome back. So again, we're going to take you on a quick tour of some laureates that caught my eye with some cool stories. Again, there are 149 laureates, 149 people who've been inducted to the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame. So many stories, we can't possibly cover all those stories today. So I really encourage you, check out the website, come to the Medical Hall of Fame, check out some of these stories for yourself. But we're going to show you some of some interesting stories. So down here, David Jenkins. Why is David Jenkins important? He basically came up with the glycemic index. What is that? Certain carbohydrates that we eat have higher glycemic index and put our sugars higher. Some don't have as much of an impact. So day to day in the grocery store and at our dinner tables, that glycemic index that we use, David Jenkins, Canadian, came up with that. And we're going to come around here. So a few laureates in the field of cancer. A few caught my eye. So Dr. Sylvia Fedoruk and Dr. Harold Johns. What did they do? They were involved in developing what's called the cobalt bomb, which is a form of cobalt therapy, so radiation therapy. This is used to treat cancers and has been used to treat cancers for years, not so much now, but in the past. Treated millions of patients with cancers with radiation therapy, saved countless lives. Two famous Canadians, and that was at University of Saskatchewan for Dr. Harold Johns, so, along with Dr. Sylvia Fedoruk. Two others, right here at Western, Dr. Charles Thomas Beer and Dr. Robert Lang Noble. What did they do? So they were investigating a plant, the Madagascar periwinkle, trying to find a possible use for diabetes. Didn't really work for diabetes, but what they found was it was reducing the white blood cells. Why is that important? They used that to then develop a medication called vinblastine, which we use for cancer treatment. So you trying a plant here in London ended up becoming a treatment for Hodgkin's, for testicular cancer, again, saving millions of lives, Dr. Charles Beer and Dr. Robert Noble. So again, in the field of cancer, we're going to now head over to the area of neurology. So we're over in the brain and mind section. So again, you can see so many laureates that have had so much of an impact. We're just going to focus on a few. Right here, Dr. Wilder Penfield. That name may sound familiar to those of us who grew up at those Canadian Heritage Moment commercials with the Dr. Penfield and the woman who smelt the burnt toast. That was Dr. Penfield. Why is that important? He was a neurosurgeon, and a lot of the treatments that he did involving people who'd had strokes and who'd had certain deficits. A lot of that research was on Dr. Penfield. Again, he's known worldwide for his work in neurosurgery. Moving over here to Charles Drake. Again, London connection with Dr. Drake, neurosurgeon. If you're ever at University Hospital, there's a bust of somebody in front of University Hospital, right beside, I think, the bus depot. That's Charles Drake. He did basically world-renowned work in aneurysms, aneurysm treatment. There was a specific clip called the Drake clip that he developed. Again, saved countless lives around the world in treatment of aneurysms. Down here is another one. We're going to focus on Dr. Charles Tater. Why is he famous? Some of you who've been following concussion research may know Dr. Charles Tater, world-renowned in terms of concussion management, prevention. Any professional sports league that's going through controversy when it comes to concussions, you're going to see his name. Again, probably the most famous concussion researcher in the world, involved in guidelines, and that's Dr. Charles Tater. So again, so many stories. We're not going to tell them all to you today, but again, check out the website and come down here because so many cool things that you can learn about. Canadians who've had such an impact in the neurology field. So we're over at the cells, genetic, and genomics section. A few interesting stories that I wanted to pass along. Lap Chi Choi, researcher in Toronto, helped to discover the cystic fibrosis gene. Why that's so important, obviously, we all know some patients with cystic fibrosis, and a lot of the treatments that are being developed now for cystic fibrosis are directed towards the actual genetic mutation. Again, work that started with Dr. Choi. Moving over here, these two scientific giants, so Dr. James Edgar Till and Dr. Ernest A. Mcculloch, why are they important? They together created the first method to identify stem cells. So think of how much medical research right now and innovative treatments are in the area of stem cells. Again, two Canadians who basically developed the first method to identify stem cells. And right over here, again, another London connection, Dr. Murray Barr. So those of you who've taken a high school, post-secondary level science class may have heard of a Barr body. So basically, in cells, distinguishing females from males, and females, there's kind of a clumped up piece of genetic material called a Barr body, named after Murray Barr. He was the first one to ever discover it, and did it right here at Western. All right, we're over in the bones and muscle section. And again, so many of these stories I love because they're so relevant to things that I see in practice, that are relevant to my patients. So these two stories here, Dr. David McClennan, scientist who did work in something called malignant hyperthermia. So some patients, when they get a certain type of anesthesia, develop a life-threatening condition. And there is a genetic predisposition to it, and there's something we can test for it. He did a lot of the seminal work in discovering that. And again, a lot of the tests that we still use today came from Dr. McClennan. And again, knowing what gene predisposed to malignant hyperthermia helps us to know who's at risk, and we can give different anesthetics in those patients. So that was Dr. David McClennan. And down here, Dr. Robert Salter. Again, having gone through medical training, why is that name familiar? So there's a classification of fractures called the Salter-Harris classification of fractures. That's Dr. Robert Salter, and he designed an operation for hip dislocation in children, known worldwide as the Salter operation. So a huge pioneer in orthopedic surgery, Dr. Robert Salter. All right, so we're in the heart, lungs, vessels, and blood section. Again, many interesting stories. This one caught my eye. Dr. Salim Yusuf was involved in one of the first trials looking at ACE inhibitors in left ventricular dysfunction. That's when people have heart failure, and looking at the benefit of beta blockers in patients who just had a heart attack. So again, these are medications that we still use. I look at my own patient population, 10, 15, almost 20% of patients on these medications. So Dr. Salim Yusuf was one of the people who was involved in the trial that showed us that these medications actually work. We're over at the section of the Hall of Fame for those who've done work into hormones. And I have to admit, I think this is my favorite section, only because each of these individuals did something that, again, I still use even in my practice on a daily basis. So we'll start over here. Daniel Drucker, a recent laureate from 2022, did work, or currently doing work, into a hormone called GLP. Why this is important, it's basically a stomach hormone that has implications in terms of diabetes, weight, and a lot of the medications, especially most recently, you've heard of Ozempic or Saxenda. These medications for diabetes, for weight loss, were developed based on Dr. Drucker finding that GLP as a hormone was having an impact. I can even think back to medical school. I won't date myself, but when I was in medical school, we actually had only started talking about GLP as a hormone, knowing that the stomach is not just churning up food and sending it along, that it's actually having a hormonal effect. Dr. Drucker's work basically led us to knowing what we know now, leading us to these medications, people losing significant amounts of weight, diabetes under better control, less heart attacks and strokes. Absolutely huge work from Dr. Drucker. Moving down here to Dr. Fortier, he did work in terms of the hypothalamus, which is in the brain, and the pituitary, how those kind of play off each other. He did a lot of work there. Dr. Charles Huggins, why is he important? He did work in prostate cancer. So when men have prostate cancer, and it can't be cured by either surgery or radiation, let's say it's gone beyond that, either to the nodes or it's metastatic, and we want to do something systemically to kind of knock it down. What do? Well, we basically block your male hormones. We block your testosterone. How do we know that works? That's Dr. Charles Huggins' work. into that, knowing that that actually prolongs the life of men with advanced prostate cancer. Moving over here, Dr. Michel Chrétien did work into a number of different hormones, but one of them that caught my eye was the PCSK1. The medications that we have now for cholesterol, most people are on medications called statins, which work very well for preventing heart attack and those who've had a heart attack or stroke, for preventing another one. But for certain patients, their cholesterol levels are so high that we can't bring them down with statins. And there's a medication that's been developed, injection, that basically blocks the hormone PCSK9, reduces the risk of heart attack. It's a bit of a pricey medication, but in those patients, it's actually quite important. That work came from Dr. Chrétien actually founding and discovering the PCSK9 hormone. A few other ones here. Dr. Jean H. Dussault developed a test for diagnosing neonatal hypothyroidism. So when a baby's born and they do the heel prick test and they run a whole bunch of tests, one of those tests they do is to look for an underactive thyroid, which in babies can lead to irreversible developmental delay and physical effects. He developed the test for neonatal hypothyroidism, and again saved basically hundreds of thousands of kids from this condition. A few others, two others I want to focus on. Dr. Henry Friesen did work into human growth hormone and actually purified and founded the prolactin hormone. So again, many of my patients have this, where you have a pituitary growth that releases too much prolactin. That can have effects on mood, on lactation, so you can lactate. He developed bromocriptine, which is actually one of the treatments, one of the non-surgical treatments we use to bring someone's prolactin levels down to normal levels. Last one I want to focus on here is Dr. Jacques Genet. He did a lot of work with high blood pressure. So the adrenal glands and the kidneys and sodium levels really interact with each other and have a significant effect on blood pressure. A lot of the most important work that's been done in that was Dr. Genet. And again, thanks to Lissa Foster for joining us and for giving us such a great tour of the Hall of Fame. Hopefully you enjoyed hearing some of these stories of Canadians who've had such an impact on health, science, medicine, and again, so many important discoveries, so many important work that they've done to transform the lives of people around the world. So if you have time, either online on the website for the Canadian Medical Hall of Fame or in person, free admission, don't have to pay anything, come. Look at some of the stories that we haven't touched on today. There are so many, there's 149 laureates, so many stories that you can look into. And again, the Hall of Fame here is open 8 to 8, Monday to Sunday, 7 days a week, so you can come anytime. Until next time, stay healthy.